Hello, Swampers, and welcome back to another installment here in the virtual swamp. All right, today our lesson continues to be titled Tea Acts and Tea Parties Lead to the Intolerable. All right, our focus continues to be how British policy and events like the Tea Act, the Tea Party, and the Coercive Acts, aka the Intolerable Acts, lead to rising tension or continues to add fuel to the fire, if you will. So, yesterday we started our Boston Tea Party, a dramatic performance. And after we review a few things, we're going to pick up where we left off. So, let us begin. Okay, folks, clocking in wherever you are, hands are up and down. Previously in the swamp. Dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun, psh. All right, so yesterday's lesson featured the aftermath of the Boston Massacre, and I wanted you guys to put yourselves in the shoes of a Bostonian who's just hearing about the event on King Street for the first time. And you guys communicated to me that you would be angry, that you would be scared, that you would be shocked, that you would be frightened. All right, and many of you guys came up with different ways of how you would respond. Some of you guys would lead to violence. Some of you guys lean towards protesting. Some of you guys would go on a letter writing campaign and let government officials know that you weren't happy with what took place in Boston. All right, but there was a number of different ways that you guys responded, and also there was varying opinion on which one you thought was going to be the most effective. But a lot of you guys sided with boycotts and non importation agreements because yes, protests are effective. Yes, violence towards British officials are effective. But the most effective way to get at Great Britain to try to cause some kind of change is to hurt them in their purse strings, hurt them in the pockets. And that, of course, would be boycotting and non importation agreements. All right. But then we started our dramatic performance and we were introduced to something known as the Tea Act. All right. So just a few things that I wanted to review about the Tea Act. All right. And the first is that it is not a new tax on tea. The tea that was being taxed, or the tax on tea, was already in place thanks to the Townshend Acts. But remember, those Townshend Acts were erased, they were repealed, they were canceled to try to ease the tension that was going on in Boston. All right, so this was not a new tax, nor was this a British measure to try to raise revenue and make money in the colonies. It had nothing to do with trying to make money in the colonies. It had everything to do with trying to save the crown jewel trading industry of the British East Indian Company. So what the Tea Act did was it gave the BEIC a virtual monopoly of the tea trade in America, meaning they were the only people that could legally sell tea in the colonies. All other tea sales were invalid and illegal because it was not coming from the British East Indian Company. Also, in exchange for more control of the company, Parliament was giving a huge tax break to the British East Indian Tea Company in order to get more control of it. All right, another pointer about the Tea Act that a lot of people get wrong here is that it's actually going to lower the price of tea. Now, we learned yesterday that even though the colonial buyers or the colonists might be able to purchase their tea, a better quality tea for a lower price, we found out yesterday that it's in fact colonial merchants and patriot shopkeepers that are going to be skipped over here by the British East Indian Company. So that's obviously going to be a big problem. So why this new tax? We already said that it had to do with the East Indian Company. The idea was that East Indian Company had to be saved from bankruptcy, right? That was the big word here. Because if they can't sell off their tea supply, a 3-year tea supply sitting in a London warehouse, over 17, 18 million pounds of tea sitting in this warehouse, then they were going bankrupt. Because of colonial protesting and boycotting, they refused to buy this tax tea. And they rather buy illegally smuggled Dutch tea because it was cheaper. So the British East Indian Company couldn't compete until now. Now it can compete because its price is going to be lowered. So these colonists are going to have a tough decision to make. Do I buy legal tea that's cheap, that's better quality, Or do I continue to risk breaking the law? Do I continue breaking the law and purchasing illegally smuggled Dutch tea that's not as good of quality and costs more? So this is really going to be a tough decision for the colonists, a decision that I asked you guys to predict. How do you think they're going to react and respond when they catch wind of these new, of this tea act? Are they going to welcome it with open arms and say thank you and thanks for the cheaper price and the better quality tea? Or are they going to see right through it? So today, let us pick up with our Boston Tea Party dramatic performance. All right. So, for those of you guys reading along at home, this is going to be Act One. All right. Act One, Scene One. Okay. So, let us begin. Action. Curtain rises to a backdrop with a painted scene of the Boston Harbor and 3 sailing ships tied to the wharf. Also, the exterior of a warehouse is shown. Narrator. In a world. Now, a group of men and women are congregating and listening to a newsboy. He is carrying newspapers under one arm and waving another in his hand, shouting as he walks up and down the wharf. Extra, extra! Read all about it. 3 ships arrived from England, loaded with tea. They are tied at Griffin's Wharf. The tea is taxed at 3 pence a pound. Extra, extra! Ships with tea have also arrived in New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston. Extra, extra! Read all about it. Taxed tea making its way from England. Extra, extra! Some spectators buy a newspaper and read it briefly while the newsboy continues to shout the news. One spectator waves his fist with annoyance. Spectator 1. Great Britain has certainly tried our patience, and I'm tired of this. First, it was the proclamation of 1763. We helped fight a war to win that land, and they just give it back to the natives? Really? Ridiculous. Then the writs of assistance? Sure, just barge into my house, why don't you, and destroy everything. Maybe we wouldn't smuggle if those fools didn't tax us for every little thing. Don't forget about that Sugar Act and that Stamp Act. Imagine having to buy a stamp for every piece of printed paper we use, just to keep George's treasury well supplied. What are we to that big buffoon? A giant colonial-sized piggy bank? Preposterous! Oh, of course, you don't know? That's all we are to King George. We harvest the raw materials, we do all the work, and then he turns them into finished products and he sells them right back to us. We don't need them anymore. We can manufacture our own products. We can govern ourselves. And now, says Spectator 2, in addition to lobster backs in and around our homes, a tax on the one drink a man enjoys, a poor man enjoys, our precious tea? How can we live without it? I say we must. It's better than paying that tax. But how can we live without it, says Spectator 4. Tea is part of our culture. Tea is part of our lives. The king has this all wrong. Maybe we can write him a letter communicating our issues with the Tea Act. A letter. We must live to live without it. We must learn to live without it. The time for talk is over, my friends. We must not pay the tax no matter how much we want this tea. It is a matter of principle at this point. Now the tea tax? Next, there will be something else. There will be no end to it. King George, says Spectator 2, has no right to do this to us. We don't even have representation in Parliament. He says that he's making decisions for us with our best interests in mind. I say that's a bunch of baloney. And I say, says Spectator 3, no taxation without representation. And then altogether, hear, hear, no taxation without representation. No taxation without representation. Let's go right now, says Spectator 4, to Merchant Clark's at the warehouse, and lets demand that he not unload the tea from those ships. And all 4 spectators walk off. Off to Merchant Clark's! To the warehouse! To the warehouse! And off to the warehouse they go. Scene 2 opens with the same backdrop with a group of colonists congregated in front of it. Richard Clark, this man seen here, is a merchant and owner of a warehouse, and one in which that is favored by the British. He is what's known as a co-signee. He is a loyalist shopkeeper, merchant, warehouse owner. And he is about to be faced by an angry group of colonists. They have come as the committee to protest the arrival of tea and especially the tax on it. First committee member, Richard Clark, you British bootlicker, get out here right now. We're here to speak for the people of Boston. We ask you to promise not to sell the cargo of tea that just arrived and is in your charge. Yeah, what he said. We demand that you send those chests of tea back to London unopened, or else. Or else? Who do you think you're talking to? You're coming into my warehouse and making demands of me. Listen to me, you punks. You can make all the demands that you want, but this tea will be landed and distributed. You have no right to speak to me in this manner. Leave my warehouse at once. We have the rights of an oppressed people. Clark, that tea is taxed, and it was taxed without our consent. Our rights are being violated. Why don't you see that? Our rights that are stated in the English Bill of Rights are being stomped on. That tea better not be landed, Clark, and you better not distribute it, or else. I have nothing to do with governmental matters. I am a merchant and the owner of a warehouse. If I'm told to sell the tea, then I sell it. I suggest you speak to the governor of Boston, Thomas Hutchinson. Now I must leave, and so should you. Clark makes an exit. A meeting with loyalist Governor Thomas Hutchinson will get us nowhere. Agreed. We must tell Sam Adams. Something must be done. End scene. And that is it for today's dramatic performance, folks. But this is now what I want you to consider. The Tea Act has been passed. You, as a Bostonian, how will you respond? And which of these suggestions will you support? So these are a few of the suggestions, but I'm going to switch off to the doc so that you can see the worksheet that you guys are going to be on today. All right, it says, examine the different possible colonial responses to the Tea Act below. Analyze these responses and determine the pros and cons of each potential action. In addition, please discuss the potential effectiveness of each response. All right, so here are the possible responses you can take as a Bostonian. All right, and for each response, I want you to write down a pro, a positive about that response, a con, a negative about that response, and then I want you to give it an effectiveness score. 1 being, yeah, laughable, not effective at all. 5 being, that's going to make things happen. That's going to change. That's going to be a very effective response. So the first one is send petitions to Parliament demanding that it be repealed. So simply write letters and get a lot of signatures on it and demand that the Tea Act be canceled. 2, organize mobs to destroy the tea and other property of the British East India Company, so ships, buildings, etc. The British East India Company can't sell tea if there isn't any. All right, so that's response 2. 3, organize a boycott of British tea. If colonists don't buy the tea, then they won't be paying the tax, and this whole policy will fail. All right, so boycott British tea, continue to smuggle, continue to purchase Dutch tea, even though it's illegal and it's breaking the law. 4, organize a boycott of British goods in general. So not just tea, but all British goods. And that includes non-importation agreements, of course. The lack of trade may hurt colonial economy, but it will hurt the British merchants as well. They may then pressure Parliament to withdraw the tax. So yes, this may hurt you and your colonial economy, but it will also hurt British merchants who will then get in the ears of Parliament to try to get them to withdraw the tax. And the last, don't protest and don't boycott. Buy the tea and pay the tax. Say thank you for the cheaper tea. And that would be option 5. So remember, pros, cons, and effectiveness score. And when finished with that, I want you to consider this last question. The Tea Act has been passed. How will you respond? So, which of these suggestions, and it could be one suggestion or it could be 3, it's up to you. Which of these suggestions will you support and why? All right. So, again, pick a few. Tell me why you would pick those and why you think that would cause some kind of favorable change. All right. That's your work for today, everybody. Have a lovely Tuesday. Catch you back in the virtual swamp tomorrow. Have a great day.